Where is... Okay. You don't have to clap because you're not wearing the microphone. No, not you guys. You just gotta project.
Over the last 3 years, ISIS has made hundreds of attacks in Iraq and Syria, and as Christians, all of us in this room would be shot, beheaded, or worse if we were in ISIS sites today. Jeff Fortenberry, a U.S. congressman for Nebraska, said in 2014, speaking against ISIS's crimes against humanity, as he put it, as can be seen on fortenberry.house.gov, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, commonly called ISIS, is waging an ongoing genocide against Christians, Yazidis, and other religious minorities in Iraq. The question at hand in the speech and in the world is not whether ISIS is a threat. The question is how to stop them. Any discussion of ISIS has to include threat assessment and address the religious aspects of the group, and of course has to propose a solution. ISIS is a significant threat to the United States of America and the world as a whole. According to IraqBodyCount.org, in 2014 alone, there were over 4,000 civilian deaths attributed to ISIS. They've made attacks outside the Middle East, as seen in the RT article, ISIS vows attacks on France calls Muslims to join new caliphate. They've made clear and published plans to invade and conquer over 30 countries in the Middle East and Europe. Whether this is propaganda or not, the ferocity and barbarism ISIS has shown means that we have to take this threat seriously, especially considering the fact that whether actually responsible or not, they have claimed responsibility for the recent attack in Texas. Their goals are more than political or military, they're religious. From ISIS's perspective, conquering, subjugating, and ruling is inevitable. Their actions are mandated by their religion, in which is said in Surah 4, verse 95, Allah has preferred the mujahideen who strive and fight in the cause of Allah over those who stay behind. Richard Zimmerman, who studied the Quran intensively for 3 years and who has studied Islam and Muslim culture since 1985, said, and I quote, "Muhammad did not lead a peaceful revolution. His followers have followed in his steps." He explained that although ISIS takes a more extreme view of the Quran than some Muslims, their actions are justified in some places by the Quran. In Surah 9, verse 39, the Quran says, "If you do not go forth, He will punish you, Allah will punish you with a painful punishment and will replace you with another people. You will not harm him at all." In verse 5 of the same surah, Muslims are told to not only kill those who don't share their beliefs, but to capture, ambush, and besiege them. When asked whether Islam is peaceful, Mr. Zimmerman replied that if it were, there was no need for Muslims in the past to make invasions in the Middle East and Europe as late as the 1300s. This is corroborated by Dr. James M. Arlinson in his article, Timeline of the Islamic Crusades, giving evidence of invasions both before and long after Muhammad's death in Europe and the Middle East, going up to one last unsuccessful siege of Vienna in 1683. When asked if Americans understand how dangerous ISIS is, Mr. Zimmerman stated, absolutely not. He explained that in our history, the U.S. has been fairly isolated. The only times in the last 100 years that we have gotten directly involved with an overseas belligerent threat were when we were directly attacked, which doesn't happen often since two sides of our country are protected by their respective oceans, and the other two on one side, we have a country that is nowhere near being a threat since they're a little too concerned with potential maple syrup thefts, and on the other side, we have a country that seems to prefer to emigrate here than to conquer. But in World War I, we stayed uninvolved until the Nazi U-boat actions became too intolerable for Americans. And in World War II, we again stayed out of the fight until December 7th, 1941, when suddenly the war became very, very real for American citizens. The war with ISIS so far is not a world war. It's not a guerrilla war. In this war, we know who the enemy is. We have been attacked, although not on as grand a scale as Pearl Harbor. But for some unknown reason, Americans have remained disconnected from the threat. Part of this is because the threat is across an ocean. Another is a lack of appreciation for the fact that if they so chose, ISIS could bomb any one of a dozen or any dozen out of 100 schools, residential areas, or hospitals in the United States. If the U.S. or any of the other countries in the UN want to end the threat, we have to act decisively. The only way to defeat ISIS is to move aggressively. Any time delayed is time for ISIS's soldiers and leaders to gain a stronger foothold in the Middle East. The U.S. and as many members of the UN as possible must launch an incursion, a dramatic targeted attack against ISIS, as that will be the only possible way to stop them. In 1938, the leader of Nazi Germany threatened war if Britain, France, and Italy stood in the way of the Nazi infiltration and invasion of Czechoslovakia. If those three countries had immediately responded with the same fervor and ferocity that they would 5 years later, thousands, if not millions, of deaths may have been averted. As seen on intrepidcore.com/timestream/ISIS, before 2006, ISIS essentially didn't exist. In October of that year, the Islamic State in Iraq was formed as an offshoot, as it were, of Al-Qaeda. The Islamic State in Iraq and Levant was announced in 2013. In 2014, Al-Qaeda renounced all ties to ISIL, and ever since then, whether they've been called ISIS, ISIL, or just IS, they've made virtually non-stop attacks in the Middle East. As seen at warontherocks.com in the article, "How many fighters does the Islamic State really have? ISIS probably has between 30 and 80,000 members, not counting those who are not on the front lines. With how quickly ISIS is formed and the threat that they are, it's likely that this will be the smallest they ever are again. Their past actions show, or at least indicate, that in the near future we probably will see direct, aggressive, militant action reminiscent of the Germans in the 30s and 40s. ISIS has shown that they are brutal, single-minded, and completely closed to negotiation. They will not stop, relent, or show mercy because they believe that their actions are approved and even encouraged by their God. ISIS is a massive threat and there is no dissuasion. If ISIS is left unchecked, if leaders, soldiers, and voters do nothing to stop them, thousands more will die in unimaginably cruel ways, and it will never stop. Thank you for your time.